So, a long time ago, we had the Bathtub meta, and this was a submarine that was as cheap as possible, that had the ability to apply as much power projection as possible at sea to do, for instance, naval invasions and other naval shenanigans, such as, say, convoy raiding and controlling all the convoys and doing perfect blockades. To be fair, it wasn't really good at blockading. It was projecting naval supremacy to do naval invasions. It was basically kind of a way of doing a really cheap, easy sea lion. And it was kind of okay effective with this. You need at least like 200 of them, which was pretty easy to do because they were incredibly cheap. And what did the Bathtub look like? Let's have a look. Bathtub was basically the early submarine with a single torpedo tube with a total production cost of 390. Amazing. And it only had a very low manpower cost of 200, but you would spit out like 200, 300 of these. You'd put them on, let's say, Strike Force, and then you can do your naval invasion from the mainland towards England and do your little D-Day. And of course, it works in a lot of other scenarios too. It was very effective for Italy because she had to have more naval supremacy than France and the UK, which is very difficult for Italy. And Japan is quite difficult to do, like the invasion of, let's say, Indonesia, the Philippines, even Australia, if you're having to deal with the American, French, and UK fleets. So it was a really good way of manipulating the mechanic. However, they nerfed it to the ground, and now they've increased the ratio of how much manpower is required to assert naval power projection. Now, I don't have the exact equation. Some of you modder boys can jump into the files and find out exactly how the equation works. So what it's done now is it's mean that the manpower is so low on a submarine compared to its IC cost that the amount of projection that a single Bathtub has is very, 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 very low. So therefore, it will not be very effective to produce these. You would have to produce maybe 2 or 3 times more of these to have the same impact you had before. So instead of using 200 to 300 Bathtubs, you'll be needing 400, 500, 600, 700, maybe even 800. I think I needed, from testing, about 1,000 of them to actually dominate the 1936 Navy of the British, which is just insane. And it's just not worth it, because think about it as well. Bathtubs are so combat ineffective. Once you've done your naval invasion, you can't really use them for anything else. In that case, why not just make regular submarines? I suppose that's an option. Now we know that manpower plays a bigger factor in projecting naval supremacy. What would be the replacement for the Bathtub strategy? And in one of my previous videos on my main channel, I use a 1936 Battleship 2. Why? Because you start the game with it, and then you could just pop on a heavy battery and a single heavy engine, Mark 1 engine. You've got 5,200 manpower, and the production cost is 6,806. And if you produce these from the very start of the game, you should maybe make about 8, 9, 10 of them. And when you get to 1940, 1941, doing invasion and doing your Sea Lion, you might have about 15 to 20 of them from all the naval dockyards and the production that you've got. And that should be way more than enough to get more than 60% naval supremacy to do your naval invasion, do your D-Day of the UK. But then I asked myself the question, is this the best ratio to manpower to production costs? Or is there maybe a ship out there that maybe do a better job at it? So we cracked out the spreadsheets and we just looked at what the best ratio would actually be. And here we go. We've got the Battle Cruiser 2. So just be aware, it's classed as a battle cruiser, not a battleship. What makes a battle cruiser compared to a battleship? Well, you use a heavy hull, and it depends on the armor you put on it. In this case, the Battle Cruiser Armor 1 is a battle cruiser, and the Battleship Armor 1 is a battleship. It is better to go with the cruiser because it has a less overall production cost, and the manpower requirement is exactly the same. See, battleship, battle cruiser, manpower is still 5,200, and the cost comes down significantly for the battle cruiser. It's basically a cheaper, faster battleship. In this case, there's no point going for the battleship because it's just going to have more IC costs and the manpower cost will be the same. So here we go, Battle Cruiser 2. So here we go. So this is the Battleship B hull, which has the minimum requirement of modules applied to it, therefore to make it the cheapest overall costs. In this case, 1 heavy battery, Mark 1 engine, and Mark 1 battle cruiser armor, giving it a total cost of 66,000, which I've just round that down. To be fair, it should be 67. To be fair, I should round that one up. And the overall manpower cost is 5,200, as you can see. So I've removed 2 digits off the end of it just to simplify these numbers to make it easier. Anyway, we go through a bunch of these really quickly. So Battle Cruiser 1 was another example. Here we go. As you can see, the production cost is only very slightly less, but the manpower cost is significantly less, so therefore it wouldn't be a good replacement. Then we went with the special ships for Germany, because Germany is the best nation to do this as, because you need lots of power projection early game, as well as late game, mid game. The pre-Dreadnought was really awful because the production cost is way too high. The Panzerschniff is kind of better, but the manpower cost is way too low. And then we come down to the more light ships here. So we've got the Light Cruiser 2. It just wasn't effective at all. The production cost was way too high, so the manpower ratio. Light Cruiser was the same. Now, what about spitting out really rubbish ships, such as like Destroyer 1s, for instance? So we tried this one as well. The manpower cost is very, very low, and the production cost is low, but the ratio just isn't there. Then we've got the old Bathtub, so it's basically a 2-for-1. Then we decided to try out actual carriers. So if you're not familiar with carriers, they come in quite a few different shapes and sizes. So the initial carrier tech is called deck conversions. So the history behind this is the original carriers were actually converted cruisers and battleships. So we have the battleship version here, and then we have the cruiser version here. We have a significant manpower requirement, and the production cost isn't too bad too. And what's a bit strange about them though, compared to the others, which is not noteworthy, I suppose, is that when you add on the hangar space, it has a manpower requirement. So in the case it was 1,000 manpower, now I've had an extra one and it's under 2,000. Just an example. So with a minimum amount of modules to make it actually usable, the battleship carrier has 5,500 manpower for 62,000. And you get the idea, basically. See, the ratio seemed to be really good for the carriers. Then we found the carrier 2, which seems to be the best of the best at 50 to a production cost of 46. And then we just, for an extra try, we went for the super heavy battleship 2, which was a decent ratio as well. So what do these numbers really tell us then? These numbers tell us how much you're getting production-wise for the amount of manpower you put into it. So as you can see, initially, the old bathtub here is a 2-for-1, so it's a 0.5. So for every one production cost you put into the old bathtub, you get 0.5 manpower. An example is the Battlecruiser 1, the one that was the effective model. For every one production cost you get out of that, you got 0.79 out of it. And it turns out, just by chance, may not even be doing the numbers, that this wasn't a really effective model. And as you can see, the least effective models obviously are showing, like the light cruiser, for instance. There's just no manpower compared to IC. But then we see some really strange results when it comes down to the carrier. So for every one production you put into the battleship carrier, you get 0.87 manpower out of it. The cruiser less so, because the manpower requirement is significantly lower. Surprisingly though, the super heavy battleship was really, really interesting. To be fair, it came really close when it came down to the Battlecruiser 2, as well as the super heavy battleship. To be fair, it should be tied for third place for both of them, hence the reason why one of them doesn't look the same, hence the reason why the numbers are very close. However, the winner was actually the carrier 2. So for every one production cost you put into a carrier 2, you got 1.09 manpower out of it. So it turns out that was the actual best ratio. And I can confirm from doing a little test game that it actually works. It does work. If you use Strike Force with significant amount of carriers, you do have the ability to activate naval invasions immediately. One factor I've just realized on hindsight is that you've got to factor in the cost for the planes as well. But to be fair, you don't need the planes. However, it's one of those moments of like, you don't need them to do power projection. However, if you do have them, it's nice to have some combat effectiveness out of the carriers. So you say, oh, we figured it out then, right? Carriers are the solution. You can make a bathtub carrier, basically, a naked carrier to project naval power to do naval invasions. Well, kind of. It works just for the sole purpose of activating naval invasions. However, for the long run and actually use it actually in the game, turns out the carrier isn't the best option. Let's just go through this. So the three downside of the carrier 2 is, one, it requires planes to do the actual damage. And I'll admit, it's not a fair test I've not included the IC for the planes, because that should really be factored in as an overall cost, but it technically wouldn't make any difference for the actual power projection. So it just makes sense I'm not included, but it is a specific con. You need to make the planes as additional if you want to do actual damage. But once again, that is actually optional. 2, if you have more than, once again, I'm not sure on the numbers on this one. I think it might be 3 or 4. They keep changing it. But more than 2 or 3 or 4 carriers in battle, you suffer from a 20% penalty for how effective those sorties can actually effectively do damage in battles. So you might be doing damage with lots of these cool naval bombers. However, the amount of damage projection is going to be very, very low due to the penalties of overstacking carriers in battles. So it kind of looks like, wow, I'm doing so much naval power, but the truth is you're not really doing that much overall due to the actual way naval battles work. Just be aware that's actual naval battle. So you're actually engaged in 2 fleets of engaged. You'll have a pop-up icon at the very top that says that you have got a penalty to overstacking actual carriers themselves. A third thing, obviously, Germany is going to be one of those nations that can take advantage the most. So will Italy. Less so Japan, because you start off with the carrier technology for Japan. But overall, that means is Germany, you can have a year out of not making these ships because you have to research deck conversions and then carrier 2 to actually get to the right point. So that may lose out on 3 or 4, potentially 5 carriers overall because you can't produce them in the very first year of the game. It's a less note, I suppose. I actively use these carriers, the super bathtubs we'll call them, against Britain, and I was able to land, but then we run into an issue where I wasn't able to push any further north in England because they were convoy raiding the English Channel. In a normal game, that wouldn't be a big deal because I'd have these ships to actually fight in the English Channel and contest the English Channel. The problem was these naval bombers on the carriers just didn't work. They weren't an effective force in the English Channel. Maybe it's a screening penalty. Maybe it was just just the raw combat effectiveness, but they just sucked. They absolutely sucked. From a previous game where I didn't make carriers, I made the battleship 2s, this one, the cruiser 2s. It turns out they overall were more combat effective just overall. It's almost gone full circle. We found out the ratio is the best for the carriers, the carrier 2, but overall for rounded combat effectiveness, it is actually better to go with the battleship 2. So what would that look like? This would be this with a single battery, single battle cruiser armor 1, and the Mark 1 heavy engine. And it would result in this. With this overall, so it's 250 HP for the carrier and 388 HP. So that's the amount of damage you can be inflicting the ship until it sinks. So it has more, it has overall the ability to become a damage sponge to actually make those battles last longer and actually deal more damage in the long run. Secondly, it has armor, so it can deflect some more overall damage. So its effectiveness surviving these battles is a lot significantly longer. And overall, it does what you wanted it to do. It actually has some combat effectiveness with heavy attack and heavy piercing. So this battleship can actually pierce itself, which is kind of going to be an issue overall. So it kind of felt like, oh, wow, we've really done the math on this one, and we've really figured out what the new Bathtub is to cheese your naval invasion shenanigans. And it looks like it was the carrier too, but the truth is, when it comes down to overall effectiveness, which you kind of want both, you want them to fight as well as project naval supremacy. The actual winner of it overall is the Battlecruiser 2. You could argue the super heavy battleship is okay, but there's another downside of the really heavy ships where they've got high HP and they spend like months upon months, but 6 months being repaired if they take any actual damage. So overall, I think the Battlecruiser 2 is going to be the winner here. More testing probably required, as with everything with Hoi 4 meta related. But overall, the battleship can research at the start of the game as Germany, which is a massive advantage. And overall combat effectiveness is massive. And to be fair, let's be real. If you want to take it the next logical step, take it another step further than this, what you could do is just add on a secondary battery to give it some light attack. And to be fair, at this point, we have a very well-rounded battleship. In all fairness, if you spam a lot of these out, you will dominate the seas from pretty much the rest of the game. I suppose as a final note, nothing's to stop you from adding on some carriers to sit on the back line and deal damage with the battleships if you wanted to. The best ship design would probably be something like this, where you would take advantage as much deck space as possible, the most increase in manpower, and then you have the fewest number of carriers on the back line to not suffer from the overstacking penalty to deal actual damage. Overall, I don't think there'll be anything that could deal much damage to knock you out in that scenario. Guys, if you want this kind of math videos and more meta breakdowns, feel free to like and subscribe. Hey, and if you want another video, this video will talk more about more Hoi 4 goodness. Oh, this one. Or it might not be a Hoi 4 video. I don't know.